Hohhot, Inner Mongolia, November 24th. It's the kind of afternoon where you'd expect the most exciting thing to happen would be a particularly stubborn gust of wind blowing a plastic bag across the road. But instead, the locals got a front row seat to a demolition derby that wasn't on the official calendar. Picture a blue sedan, the sort of sensible car you'd see in a suburban driveway in Dubbo, suddenly deciding it has a personal vendetta against the front gates of the regional government headquarters. This wasn't a case of someone accidentally hitting the accelerator instead of the brake while looking for a parking spot. This was a deliberate full tilt send it moment. The car slammed into the gates with enough force to make every bureaucrat inside spill their tea simultaneously. But in China, the response to a fender bender at the government gates isn't a civil exchange of insurance details and a grumpy phone call to the NRMA. Oh no, they went full Mad Max on him. Before the dust had even settled, a black armoured riot van, the kind of heavy-duty beast that looks like it's built for surviving a zombie apocalypse, came screaming onto the scene and rammed the sedan until it was puffing more smoke than a bushfire in January. Once the car was pinned and looking like a crushed beer can, a swarm of armed police and security guards descended on it like seagulls on a dropped chip at Bondi Beach. They weren't there to offer a hand or check the bloke's pulse. They started smashing the windows in with batons, looking for all the world like they were trying to tenderize a particularly tough piece of steak. The whole scene was pure chaos, a cacophony of breaking glass, shouting, and the low hum of the armoured van's engine. They dragged the driver out, a bloke dressed in white who probably hadn't planned on being the main event of a riot video that day, and whisked him away into the back of a van faster than you can say fair dinkum. The onlookers were there in force, of course, because humans are the same everywhere. We love a bit of drama. People were snapping photos and arguing about what just happened, but the Great Firewall of China was already on the case. By the time the locals got home to upload their footage, the digital janitors had scrubbed the internet cleaner than a surgery ward. Search for Hohhot government crash and you'd get nothing but pictures of fluffy clouds and propaganda about happy farmers. But the search history on the Chinese version of TikTok told a different story. The words government gate, accident and incident at the gates were trending like a new flavour of Tim Tams, proving that even the most high-tech censorship can't stop people from noticing when someone tries to park a sedan in the governor's lobby. A local woman, let's call her Miss Wang, managed to get word out to the overseas media, and she didn't mince her words. She confirmed the whole thing was real and said the government cut the internet in the area faster than a lizard drinking just to stop the news from leaking. She wasn't sure if shots were fired, but she was dead certain about one thing. You don't ram a government gate unless you've been treated like absolute rubbish by the system. In her view, there must have been some serious injustice, some fair go that went missing to drive a person to that level of desperation. You don't see people in Australia driving into the local council chambers because they're annoyed about the bins being late. This is the kind of stuff that only happens when the pressure cooker has the lid welded shut. Mess. Wang pointed out that since the party set up shop, this sort of thing has basically never happened in Hohhot. And the new mayor? She's been in the job for less than a month. Talk about a welcome to the office party you'd rather skip. The general vibe is that the public is starting to realise the whole system is about as stable as a three-legged stool in a gale. People are fed up with the political pressure and an economy that's flatter than a road-killed toad, and the social friction is starting to create some serious sparks. Unlike those tragic, senseless attacks we've seen recently where people lash out at randoms in schools or parks, this bloke went straight for the source. He found the right address for his grievance. The internet comments from the brave side of the firewall were telling. One bloke wrote, "Finally, someone found the right target. Good on you, China." Another one chimed in with, "Stop going for the schools and start going for the gates." It's a grim state of affairs when the general public is cheering for a bloke ramming a building, but that's what happens when you take away every other way for people to have a moan. The Chinese people are reaching their limit, and they're starting to realise that the source of their misery isn't their neighbour or the local shopkeeper, it's the lot sitting behind those big, fancy gates. Fast forward a few days to Shanghai, and the scene is just as absurd, but in a completely different, more paranoid state kind of way. It's the 3rd anniversary of the white paper protests, you remember? The time everyone stood around holding blank pieces of paper because the government had banned literally every word of protest. It was the most polite get stuffed in human history. To mark the occasion, the Bund was crawling with more plainclothes cops than a hipster festival has overpriced sourdough. You couldn't walk 10 feet without bumping into a bloke in a windbreaker who looked suspiciously like he was more interested in your backpack than the scenery. Along comes this tourist, a bloke who'd been biking his way across China, probably just looking for a decent photo to show his mates back home. He stops in front of the Peace Hotel, reaches into his bag to pull out a flag for a quick snap, and before he can even get the fabric to unfurl, two undercover wallopers jump him like he's trying to sell stolen watches. They didn't even give him a second to breathe. He wasn't even waving the thing, he was just holding it. And what was the revolutionary message on this dangerous flag? Was it a call to arms? A demand for a regime change? Nope. It was a bit of poetry and some nice calligraphy. That's it. Some bloke's nice handwriting was enough to send the Shanghai police into a state of total meltdown. He was hauled off for questioning because apparently, in modern China, poetry is a threat to national security. The comments on X or Twitter, for those who haven't caught up, were absolute gold. One user noted that there were more secret squirrels than tourists on the Bund that day. It's pretty obvious who's actually scared here. It isn't the tourists or the blokes with the bikes, it's the CCP. They're living in a constant state of stranger danger, terrified that a bit of silk and ink is going to bring the whole house of cards crashing down. If your government is that worried about a tourist with a poem, maybe your grip on power isn't as rock solid as the Evening News claims it is. It's like being a 6'4" footy player who's terrified of a ladybug. It's embarrassing for everyone involved. But if you think a poetry flag is a bit over the top, wait until you hear about the grave war in Guizhou and Yunnan. This is where things get truly personal and, frankly, a bit macabre. The government in these regions decided to pull a real tell them they're dreaming move by banning traditional burials. They want everyone cremated. Now, they claim it's to save land, but the locals know a cash grab when they see one. To the villagers, this is just another way for the government to squeeze a few more bucks out of them for cremation fees and overpriced urns. It's a literal tax on dying. And in a culture where honouring your ancestors and their resting place is the most important thing you can do, this went down like a lead balloon. In the county of Yunnan, 2 separate protests kicked off on the same day. The villagers were fuming, and they didn't hold back. They told the officials, in no uncertain terms, if the party wants to start digging up graves, why don't they start with Xi Jinping's family first and see how that goes? Now, that's a level of sass we can all get behind. It's the ultimate you first, mate. The standoff was intense. In the village of Mushan, hundreds of people armed themselves with whatever they had, mostly sticks and farming tools, to protect a freshly dug grave. They weren't going to let the grave-robbing government take their relatives. Men, women, and probably a fair few kids were all out there, ready to go a few rounds with the riot police. They were playing loud recordings on loop, demanding the policy be scrapped, and they stayed out there until the small hours of the morning. The officials, realizing they were vastly outnumbered by a bunch of very angry people with heavy sticks, decided that maybe discretion was the better part of valor and backed off. For one night at least, the dead were allowed to stay in the ground. But the anger didn't stop there. In a nearby town, things got even more heated when a local official allegedly got a bit hands-on with a family member of the deceased while trying to snatch a body. That was like throwing a lit match into a dry paddock. The crowd swelled from a few dozen to hundreds in minutes, surrounding the official and his police escort. The footage of the incident is wild. You can see the officials desperately promising to pay for all the medical bills of anyone injured, just so the crowd wouldn't tear them apart. They eventually had to flee under the cover of darkness. The internet had a field day with this one too. One user suggested that if the government wants people to support cremation, they should live stream the cremation of the national leader's ancestors first. Another one called the demand to dig up Xi's ancestors first, the most inspiring request of 2025. It's funny because it's true. There's nothing quite like pointing out the hypocrisy of the elite to get the blood pumping. Over in Yunnan, it was a similar story. Over 1,000 villagers gathered to stop the forced cremation teams, and they actually won. They managed to carry out a traditional burial in defiance of the law. It's a massive bugger off to the state, and it shows that when you mess with the fundamental stuff, family, tradition, and the dead, even the most compliant people will find their backbone. Meanwhile, the CCP is also busy picking fights with the living, specifically ethnic and religious groups. In Hainan, they've been knocking down ancestral shrines belonging to the Yao and Yi people. On November 17th, a massive squad of riot police showed up in a village to tear down a shrine, and the locals didn't just sit there and take it. They didn't have guns, but they had culture, and they used it. They started beating drums and pelting the demolition crew with raw rice. Now, to you and me, that might look like a messy wedding, but in their culture, throwing rice is a ritual to ward off evil spirits and curse your enemies. They were literally calling down the bad juju on the government's head. One elderly woman was shoved to the ground by the cops, which only made the rice pelting more enthusiastic. They were essentially telling the demolition team that they were cursed and that bad luck would follow them home. It's the spiritual version of see you in court, but with more grains of jasmine. A few days before that, in another part of the region, they actually succeeded in tearing down a Buddhist shrine that was a spiritual anchor for the local clans. The women tried to block the bulldozers with their own bodies, crying and pleading, but the state has no heart for that kind of thing. They smashed it to pieces. But here's the bit that gives you a bit of hope for humanity. The very next day, the villagers were back at the ruins. They weren't just crying, they were picking up the bricks, one by one, and starting to rebuild. It's like trying to stop a bushfire with a garden hose. The government can keep dousing it, but the spirit just keeps smouldering and relighting. The experts reckon the CCP is terrified of any kind of spiritual or mental space that they don't control. Whether it's Christianity, Falun Gong, or local folk religion, if it's a group of people thinking for themselves and bonding over something other than the party, it's a target. It's the ultimate insecure boyfriend move on a national scale. They want to be the only thing you love, the only thing you worship, and the only thing you fear. And then there's the economic state of the place, which is currently about as healthy as a meat pie left in the sun for a week. The world's factories running out of steam. For the first time in decades, the migrant workers, the millions of people who move from the countryside to the cities to build the gadgets we use every day, are heading home early. Usually, they'd wait for the Lunar New Year, but this year, they're packing their bags months in advance because there's simply no work. The factories are closing, the trade wars are biting, and the Chinese dream is starting to look more like a Chinese nap. The government is absolutely bricking it. They're so worried about these millions of unemployed, worldly wise workers heading back to the villages and starting a revolution that they've actually set up a task force to monitor them. They're sending officials to knock on doors, asking about their income and their family pressures. It's basically a state-sponsored welfare check with a heavy side of don't you dare start a protest. They're terrified that these workers who have seen the wealth of the cities and the corruption of the system will become the leaders of a new peasant uprising. To make matters worse, the party is so paranoid they've started removing statues of historical rebels. Last year, they took down a statue of Li Zisheng, the peasant leader who famously toppled the Ming dynasty. They also moved a monument to the Taiping Rebellion. Think about that for a second. The Communist Party, which literally came to power through a peasant revolution, is now so scared of peasant revolutions that they're erasing them from the history books. It's like a rock star who becomes a billionaire and then tries to ban anyone else from playing the guitar. They're petrified that a bronze statue of a bloke with a sword from 400 years ago is going to give some hungry farmer a dangerous idea. It's pathetic, really. It's the behavior of a regime that knows its time is up and is desperately trying to hide the exit signs. Everyday life is becoming a series of skirmishes between the people and the Chengguan, the urban management officers who are basically power tripping more cops on a state-funded ego trip. There's footage from Liaoning showing these guys raiding a fruit stall and stealing the vendor's stock while the poor bloke begs for mercy. They just toss his apples and oranges into the back of a truck like they're garbage. To the people watching, it's not law enforcement. It's just a bunch of state-sanctioned bandits. Witnesses are standing around asking, what's the difference between you and a common thief? And the answer, of course, is the uniform. But that uniform is losing its power. Protests are up by 45%. People are hanging banners in broad daylight calling for the end of the dictatorship and the removal of the traitor Xi Jinping. It's becoming a daily occurrence, a constant low-level roar of discontent that the government is trying to drown out with propaganda and police batons. Experts are looking at 2026 as the tipping point. You've got a massive population of young, skilled, and very angry people who have no jobs in the city and no future in the country. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place, and they've realized that the rock is the Communist Party and the hard place is the economy. The party has wrecked. They're united, they're brave, and they've got nothing left to lose. Whether the whole house of cards comes down tomorrow or next year is anyone's guess, but the cracks are getting wider by the day. You can ram the gates, You can snatch the flags, you can dig up the graves, and you can steal the oranges, but you can't kill the spirit of a billion people who just want a fair go. So, here's to the blokes in the blue sedans, the tourists with their poetry, and the grandmas with their bags of rice. They might not have the guns or the armoured vans, but they've got the truth on their side, and in the end, that's usually enough to make even the biggest bully start looking for the nearest exit. It's a wild ride, and the rest of the world is just watching, wondering when the pressure cooker is finally going to go bang. Grab your popcorn, folks, because the next few years in the Middle Kingdom are going to be more dramatic than a grand final replay in overtime.